I'm at 708.
Okay. So that would be cue intro. Hi, I'm Ben Furman.
And I'm Nate Blyton.
And this is Patch In, the show from SoundNotion.tv dedicated to the wonderful world of electroacoustic music. Let's start with some news. So Zoom, maker of your favorite handheld recorders, has announced their new LiveTrack L12. This is a really cool device. It's a mixer, headphone monitor, class-compliant multi-channel interface, and standalone recorder in one unit. It will be available in September for $600. It looks to be extremely useful, especially if you want to do a little bit of decluttering on your desk and maybe get rid of a lot of that other stuff that you can now replace with one unit. However, it will not make your band sound better unless you practice.
Turns out rehearsal is still part of the process for
It
getting
really
a good recording.
is.
Yeah, I was particularly excited looking at that too, because it was like a month and a half ago I was going through trying to find some new recorder to buy. And I kind of wish this would have been available then, because I ended up getting a Zoom H6, which is also super good. But I was looking at their other multi-track recorders. And this one, I'm going to be excited to try to get my hands on one of these in September.
Yeah, this is not as portable as the H6. It is a mixer style layout, but it looks pretty good. The demos sound really good. Yeah. And oh, I forgot to mention, it does have some built-in effects like reverb and compression. Those are typical built-in effects, so they're not going to make you sound as good as, say, a vintage Lexicon reverb module will. But hey, you know, for $600, it's a nice add-on.
Yeah, and with 5 separate headphone mixes out of it, it's a pretty interesting product. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the world of software, FL Studio 12.5 is out from ImageLine. Just about everything now is Vector Graphics, which is a fancy new update to their user interface. So you can resize to your heart's content. There's a new picker panel too that looks like it will finally clean up the workflow problems that they had. And the virtual touchscreen compatible MIDI controllers have been added. And as always, it's a free update. So.
Yeah, free updates are free updates. If you're an FL Studio user, you should probably go and download that as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this isn't really a news item, but there's a really interesting video that's circulating online on a bunch of different sites, Synthtopia, Create Digital Music, the KVR forums, wherever, of the upcoming Behringer D, which is available in September for $300. Being compared to the Minimoog Model D that it is just a clone of. The Minimoog, of course, is no longer available, and it was way more expensive when it was. And the few that you can find on eBay are really expensive. It's really, really close to the original Minimoog. There are some things that you might be able to chalk up to being YouTube audio compression related issues, and some might actually be the Behringer, but it's really close.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is reading the comments. And while I normally don't recommend that, it is a freaking goldmine of hilarity into the price versus purity debate that's going on in synthesizer forums right now.
Yeah. I mean, so Behringer has had a mixed kind of reputation for a long time for them making, using designs of other people or redesigning things in relationship to other things and stuff.
Let's just call it stealing.
Yeah, well, so, you know, to each their own. But having a $300 version, a new $300 version of a classic old analog synthesizer that was 2000 plus or whatever, it's an interesting conversation piece for sure.
Yeah, and it is Eurorack format compatible, and it does have built-in MIDI on the front panel, which is a really nice thing to have, especially if you're looking for adding MIDI to your Eurorack device, but you don't want to spend, you know, $300 just on the MIDI module. This way you can get the MIDI and you can get a synth.
Yeah, so it's interesting stuff. It's available for pre-order at this point, I think. But yeah, we'll let you know when it comes out for real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But our guest today is an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and is the director of their experimental music studio. He is also the creator of probably the best YouTube series to get you into Super Collider. So welcome to Eli Fieldsteel.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on. Let's start with the Super Collider YouTube tutorial. So like I said, these are really great just to get in as a novice or as a refresher. I know I've referred a bunch of my students who are interested in Super Collider to view those tutorials. How did you get started doing those?
Oh, yeah, it's a good question. I started this series when I was in graduate school. I was pursuing my doctorate at the University of Texas at Austin. I started it one summer, I want to say 2013, it might be 2012. I'd have to actually go look back at the first video and see when I uploaded it.
Seems like 2013.
I think it was 2013. So I was was introduced to Super Collider in 2007. I was a college student at Brown. My brother was a college student at Wesleyan. I was visiting him, and there's Ron Quivela teaches at Wesleyan, and he's a Super Collider user, and so there's some Super Collider activity that goes on there. Neither of us knew anything about it, but we knew how to run the examples in the help files. And so there's an interview I did with Carl Testa, who and he asked me some of the same questions, and so I'm sort of rehashing what I said there. But I just remember the sign-ask modulation examples just completely blowing my mind. I've never heard anything like it, and it was great. It's just a line of text that you run, and this crazy sound comes out. So I think at that point I was kind of hooked, and I got into it more when I was a master's student at North Texas. My friend and colleague, L. Scott Price, knew a thing or two about it and sort of got me started. And I started to build these small programs and routines that would blurp out a bunch of sounds. So I ended up doing my master's thesis for trumpet and Super Collider. And that was a big first step, like a substantial step. And through my doctorate, I just got more and more into it and really started to, fully grok the entire platform. And one refrain that I was constantly hearing, and I'm still constantly hearing, is the frustration with the documentation and basically a lack of a foothold for new users to just do anything, really. I mean, you open Super Collider and it's a blank text document.
Right.
That's just the way it is. I mean, it's not like there's something wrong with the software. It's always a trade-off between really thoroughly documented, helpful walkthrough tutorials, but then you're sort of on a railroad track and you're being railroaded in a certain direction. And then there's sort of open canvas idea where it's like, you figure it out, and it's ultimately more powerful, but there's a huge brick wall, in front of you to get started. So that was kind of the main impetus for making these tutorials. I had gotten to a point where I felt comfortable teaching somebody who knew nothing about it. And for a while before I started the video series, I was making text tutorials that I never published these or anything, but I was just it was half planning for a theoretical course that I could teach in the future and half just sort of writing down my thoughts for how to get somebody started. And then at a certain point, I just sort of realized that I could make video tutorials, and that way I can say what's going on, show it on screen, and it's the audio, the video, and me talking all together. And with all the post-production, I can cut everything so that it's sort of brief and concise and seamless. And over the course of the summer in 2013, I think I powered through like 5 or 6 videos. So I really did a substantial chunk that summer. And once I got to a point where I felt like I had done a lot of the important concepts, covered a lot of the important concepts, then I started taking more time thinking, what do I really want to talk about next? And I think tutorial 8 was a pretty long one. That took me a long time to put together. And I just finished number 18 earlier this summer. So now I wish I could make these a lot faster, but it's gotten to the point where it's about, it takes me about a week to just from start to finish, from coming up with the idea, writing the script, recording the video, recording the audio, piecing it together in iMovie, and uploading it to YouTube. It's about a week for an average tutorial.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some of those are shockingly complicated too.
Right.
You know, like when you're talking about number 8, that's the buffers
That's right.
episode. And then you also have number 10, patterns,
Yeah.
which is the p-bind.
Right. That's a popular one. I think that one's got a few more views than most of the other ones.
Yeah, I mean, that is hands down the most difficult concept I had to struggle with when I was first playing the Super Collider years ago. And it's refreshing to see a tutorial for that, since I was struggling by just reading the documentation and going to the Super Collider book and going, what in the hell does this mean?
Yeah,
there's like 5 intermediary steps that I did not have here.
Yeah, I mean, patterns are very powerful, but it's a very high level concept as far as you know, audio sequencing, right? It's once you get the hang of it, it's really sort of liberating. And I mean, look, I probably know less than 10% of the patterns that exist in the library. I mean, there's a few really important ones, and once you understand how those work, you can do a whole lot of stuff. But there's a whole bunch of patterns in the extensions and the quarks, and even in the default library, which I look at the help file and I scratch my head and I think, I'm not quite sure what that does or in what situation that would be useful. But that's okay, because you don't have to know all the patterns. You just have to know the important ones, you know, like maybe 5 to 10 really important ones that get used over and over and over again.
Right.
And yeah, that's
well, and that's always one of the things that I find is so intimidating about Super Collider, is that you do have so many more options than you can ever conceive of. Like just done actions, I think there's 15, 16 different ones.
I think there's, yeah, right, about 15 or 16, maybe.
Yeah, 4. I've only used 0 and 2 ever.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of different options. There's like 10 different ways to do any particular thing.
Yeah,
it is pretty intimidating sometimes.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to watch or spend a couple weeks on these first like 10 tutorials to understand what you two are talking about right now. And I have been able to finally dig in to the first like 3 of them, and it's been really good to finally kind of crack into it. It's interesting hearing you talk about the process of making them, because before we started recording the show, you were talking about how you keep learning more about it as you've been using it over these years and stuff. And so now this tutorial has spanned about 4 years of your using this software platform.
Right.
Yeah. Has your attitude or approach in making these tutorials changed over this time? Or is there anything that you wish you could go back and like redo the tutorial 3 of sentences and stuff?
Not really. I think I look back on tutorials like 1, 2, and 3, and I feel like I've done a pretty good job with consistency and pace. Cool. So, I mean, it's not like I screwed something up horribly and in the first tutorial. It all, I think it's correct. You know, it's accurate. It makes sense. So, I sometimes feel like, you know, a little self pat on the back is maybe in order. Just that I had a plan. I stuck with the plan. I followed through, and I think, you know, I've given myself some good momentum and a platform on which I can build. And actually, I just started live streaming.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've got 2 of those up there, I believe.
I think it's more like 5, 5 or 6. I currently, for the past 4 or 5 weeks, I've been trying to stream every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Central Time. I streamed to Twitch. It's just twitch.tv/Eli Fieldsteel. And I've been uploading those to YouTube as to sort of archive them.
Yeah.
And this is it's a totally different thing for me, you know, because I can't edit or anything. I can't cut things out. Whatever I say, it's been said.
It's there. Yeah.
but what's great about it, and the whole reason I wanted to do it, or one of the main reasons I wanted to do it, is for interaction with viewers, because people have a lot of questions that they put on the comments, and sometimes it's just not a great way to answer those questions. You know, but with live streaming, you know, they can use Pastebin or a GitHub gist or something to send me code. I put it on stream and I can look at it and things like that. So it's been a lot of fun. So
nice, sweet. How long do you do these sessions? Like
they've been about just over or under 2 hours.
Cool. Great. It's a good chunk of time. Yeah, I was reading through some of the comments in some of your tutorials and people asking questions and it being kind of complicated because not the real time back and forth.
Right. They're usually very, very good questions. And sometimes I have to sort of think about it. But it's helpful to me too, because it helps me see where, what I failed to address in the tutorial itself.
Yeah.
Right. Now I'm in the process of updating my YouTube video playlist for my courses this week, and going through and looking at my past videos has been horrifying.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, yeah, they definitely needed to be updated in a couple of cases.
Nice.
So,
yeah. Well, in any case, it's been great seeing some of this content that you're putting out here.
Right.
And I come from the background of using PD, and with its similarly opaque user interface at the start.
Right.
Yeah.
Another sort of blank canvas program.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. But to follow up on you talking about YouTube videos for your courses, another reason I wanted to start live streaming was to basically practice for a Super Collider course I'm going to teach at Illinois this fall. It's the course number is 499, and it's historically been sort of an open-ended individual composition project course, and I'm using this to teach topics which I think I can teach really well and that I think are useful for students. And so this fall I'm going to teach Introduction to Super Collider, basically.
Cool.
And all the lectures are going to be live streamed to Twitch. So for people who've already been watching those, nothing's really going to change. Maybe the date and time will change, but the topics are going to get a lot more introductory.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the in-class stuff, which won't be streamed, but that's going to be sort of the assignments and workshops and problem sets. So it's going to be kind of a flipped class.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah. I haven't been much of a Twitch watcher, but this might be a good reason to get into it myself too.
Yeah, I mean, I think Twitch was for a long time basically just video games, and now they have this creative community and programming sub communities, and there's a lot of all sorts of social eating and all sorts of strange stuff on there. No judgment, of course.
Well, no.
Sure, yeah.
It's just a great platform for people to share their ideas with the public.
Yeah.
Right. And Super Collider does lend itself better to live coding than, say, MaxMSP.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit up for debate, but I would agree. I think just because I think text is faster than I mean, with Max you can make a fancy GUI and map it to your keyboard or some controller or stuff. So you can do live things with Max, no problem.
Right.
But as far as live coding, sort of proper, Super Collider is pretty good for that.
Neat. Well, sweet. Yeah. And it seems to work pretty well with different kinds of hardware interfaces too.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely. I mean, I assume you mean not just audio interfaces or anything.
Yeah, but I know, or I've seen some of your pieces where you use a Wiimote and also a tablet, which is a different kind of venture to get into. Yeah.
Well, I think it's important to point out that a lot of these things it's not just the devices communicating straight to Super Collider. I use some intermediary software. In particular, I have found a program called Osculator. To be really handy. OSCULATOR. And that's I think it's free to download, but the full version is, last I checked, it was like $40 or something.
Yeah, still not much.
Yeah, no, great. It's totally worth it, worth every penny. Cool. And that's just great because you can have multiple. It can natively read Wiimote data, and then you can convert that into OSC messages, which can be sent to Super Collider. So So it's I think the strength of Super Collider is the fact that it's entirely built on the OSC, communication. The client and server talk to each other with OSC, and you can talk to other computers or other devices with OSC. So it's really, really handy.
Nice.
Right. That is definitely an advantage over the 30-plus-year-old MIDI specifications.
Yeah. I mean, MIDI's still handy too. I don't think it's quite comparable to OSC. It's slower. It's lower resolution. Can't be wireless. But, we still, all the DAWs are still MIDI through and through. So
Right.
still very handy.
Exactly. Yeah. In reading about some of your pieces, it seems like you've done a lot with interfacing different computers doing different jobs and all talking over OSC as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a couple of pieces where I mean, it's because I collaborated with someone who specializes in video.
Yeah.
Are you thinking about a particular piece?
Well, yeah.
There's one. The title of the piece is With We, and there's another called Genetic Anomalies.
Yeah.
Those are both for dancers and video as well as sound. And yeah, a big part of why those pieces were possible is because I had, friends and colleagues who were basically, do what I do, but with video instead of sound. And so they know OSC, they know how to make interesting visuals, and just sharing ideas with them was really handy. And so yeah, networking computers together is something I've done a little bit of. But it's not just me, I'm not the sole techno guy who's making these things.
You've got collaborators as
right.
well.
Which is an interesting thing to really talk about, because a lot of people nowadays see sort of the role of the composer as being not just doing the audio, but also doing the interactive video as well through jitter or processing or whatever else.
Yeah. I guess I have mixed feelings about that. Because there are people who study video design and interactive visual media, and it always makes me feel a little uncomfortable when I go to a conference and it's all composers, people who are classically trained, and they've this, and then they're making visuals, and a lot of them are pretty cool, some more than others. And I am of the school of thought where, if you want to do video, you should find a video artist and work with them. And I think the end products in those situations tend to be really high quality and original and impressive. So but I don't want to disparage anyone's work, because I've seen some really impressive pieces from people who are much more on the music composition side of things than doing things with visual media.
Right.
And it's interesting too, in this context of us talking to you in an audio only medium kind of thing. This With We from 2015, that was one of the ones that I was looking at, and the physical interaction with the hanging sensor and the sounds it's making, and the relationship between the choreography and the video, and it's all really striking. And
that piece was at the University of Texas. That was my last year at UT. And there's a student run, entirely student creation in concert, a performance. Basically, it's a collaboration with the theater and dance department as well as the integrated media students. So what usually happens is these groups that form, consisting of a choreographer, a composer, and a video artist, and that team gets assigned a certain number of dancers, and so you just work on a piece. And this was my 5th and final year doing this annual event, and I think I really did it right that year.
Cool.
The process was we all got together once a week, sometimes twice a week, and we would just bring media to the table and share with each other. And sometimes we'd even do some real-time audio video programming in these rehearsals, and change sounds and change visuals, and we would just sort of develop a few more seconds, or maybe half a minute or so each week, and just the piece just sort of took form, and it was really, really open and collaborative, and I think it really shows in the end product. It's really
that's amazing. Yeah. And that format or that workflow, if you will. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a really great way to do it. I mean, it's sort of creating the band and having everyone create the piece together.
Right. And the video artist I worked with, his name is Rodrigo Carvalho, and I think his website is Visiophone -net. I'm not exactly sure. I'm gonna have to. Google will figure it out. But his name is Rodrigo Carvalho, and he was outstanding. He was really committed to this collaborative workflow. He was, we always, it has to be everything together, and we should try to do don't get too far ahead of your collaborators, and really bring everything together. Constant communication. He set up like an idea board or an image board or a mood board or something where we could just post audio, video, things to share. He was a fantastic person to work with. I really appreciated having him on the team.
Excellent. We'll
Very
definitely
cool.
have a link to his stuff in the show notes too. And
Yeah. He's got a really cool website. He's prolific with his projects and collaborations. So he's got some great stuff. He's worth checking out.
Nice.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, we looked at another one of your pieces with dancers, Genetic Anomalies, from the year before that, I guess.
Right.
And that one had Wiimotes and quadraphonic sound going on.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That was a fun one as well. That one, I think I sort of went all out as far as interactivity. We had UT, the studios at UT owned 4 Wiimotes, and I said, all right, give me those Wiimotes. I'm going to do something with them. And that was
perfect.
that was a really fun process. I worked a little bit with Jeff Kurihara, who's another video artist. This guy is incredible. He specializes in projection mapping, and he's done some pretty large scale projects on there was one that I worked with him on. Is at the I think it's Texas State University. They had this new performing arts center that was opening, and we had rented this giant sound system and these like 40,000 lumen projectors. And that was really fun. So he's a fantastic guy, great chops as far as video and projection mapping. I worked with him a little bit with Isadora, which is it's a Max MSP style program. It's got the objects with patch cables, but it's for video, and so all sorts of generators and video processing modules and things like that. So we came up with a few of those ideas, and then I took it and sort of ran with it and it helped integrate that with the sound. And he was really indispensable on that project. And what I did with the Wiimotes is I'd go into the studio, and I had 4 Wiimotes. So I made 4 different sounds in Super Collider, these complex synth defs with a whole lot of UGens and a whole lot of arguments. And I, at the Wiimotes, I was using 3 streams of data for each Wiimote. I was using pitch, whether it's pointing up or down. I was using roll, which is, like barrel roll twisting, and the accelerometer. So how fast they were moving. Yeah. And so I mapped those 3 streams to 3 different arguments, sometimes multiple arguments. So each Wiimote would have this 3-dimensional way of transforming each of these 4 sounds. So it was, and then I just tweak the numbers, and then I just hold 2 in each hand and just sort of flail around the studio when it came out. And sometimes I would just sort of real time record anything that came out so that I could store that in a sound file and then reuse it. And that was and for the performance, we settled on there's 2 dancers, and each dancer has a Wiimote on the inside of the left forearm and the inside of the right shin, or the lower part of the right leg. And then the choreography sort of took shape based on where those were, and a lot of mapping numbers from one range to the other. And the process was similar to what we did the following year. With it's just we'd work on just 8 or 16 beats of choreography, and seeing how the movement could shape the sound. And I'd be there with my computer plugged into the system, and just constantly overwriting OSC defs and changing a 2.1 to a 2.2. And
nice.
Yeah, so it was a lot of that. And so that the Wiimote data it'd be sent to my computer, which was generating the audio, and Osculator would relay that to the video computer. And so it was simultaneously controlling some of the visual parameters, much in the same way that the sound was being controlled.
Nice.
Very cool. Now, when you were experimenting with that and figuring out what you could do gesturally, did that really kind of become the focus of the composition more than the coding?
Absolutely. I mean, coding was certainly involved, but I think I would, I just sort of, the whole piece is generated by the Wiimotes, really. There's large sections of the piece where if the dancers stand still, there's no sound. There's not a lot of sort of automated background sound processes.
Okay.
There's a few moments which is like a sort of a fixed gesture that happens at a specific time that I trigger, but for the most part, it's the dancers are literally making the sound with their bodies.
Excellent.
Yeah, I noticed that's kind of a theme with a lot of your works, actually. The idea of motion and gesture as a sound generating source. specifically in the pieces with Wiimotes, but also in Brain Candy
Yeah.
in particular. It's literally all about the gestures.
Yeah. That was a really fun project as well. It's the Sensor Glove project. That was I wrote that piece during my 1 year position at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, and I was filling in. I was basically filling in for Mike Pounds, who was on sabbatical, but he hadn't really left town. He was, and we he was actually still there. He just wasn't teaching, and we actually shared an office. They moved a second desk into his office, so we were just constantly hanging out. And he's actually an alum of Illinois. He was one of, I think, the head technical assistant or teaching assistant for a number of years. And he also had a brief career as a I forget if it was electrical engineer or mechanical engineer, but he's got really, really strong tech chops. And he introduced me to the Arduino platform. You know, I actually have one right here.
Oh, fancy.
Hey!
Just been tinkering with it. I'm thinking about the next SuperCollider tutorial being an Arduino tutorial. So that's
cool.
I'm just sort of, revisiting this. But once I got the hang of it, thanks to Mike, I worked on, I had this idea for, Brain Candy. I was going to have gloves with sensors on them, and I was going to figure out how to capture that data, get it into SuperCollider reliably, and map it to sound and see what sounds I could make. And that's how the piece developed.
Yeah. I love the gesture that you use where you open your hand and it sends out the ping pong ball bouncing sound.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such an appropriate and obvious sound that I wish I would have thought of that myself.
Yeah. It's kind of a crowd pleaser. It's this very, very clear, discrete, distinct gesture, silence, beginning of the piece. There's a ping pong ball.
Right. This is a clear relationship that we've got. Yeah.
And another sort of plug for one of my friends, colleagues, Carter Rice, who was finishing his doctorate at Ball State there. He was, my primary, student that I worked with. He made an Arduino piece that same year, which is just out of this world. It's called Aku's Magic. And Carter,
that's the piece for Stage Magician. Yes,
he's actually
it's such a great piece.
He's a very talented magician. Like, he's got these long dexterous fingers. He can make cards disappear, and he knows, like, sort of a lot of standard rep of magician's tricks. But he turned it into an Arduino Aku's Magic piece.
Wow.
It's just unbelievable. It's brilliant. And I think he thought of the title a long time ago. And then this was the year he finally was like, I'm doing this. I'm just going to power through it. And it's a one-of-a-kind thing. I've never seen anything like it.
Wow.
Yeah, I believe the video of that is still up on YouTube.
I think it is, yeah.
If not, I know Carter had on his website for a while.
So. Yeah.
Man, I'm very interested in that. That's what I'll be watching after the show.
Yeah, it's great because it's got the sleight of hand redirection that you'd see in a magician's show, and it's all really effective. But he's also I think the guy sweats bullets when he performs this piece because there's so many moving parts.
I bet. Yeah. Right. I mean, often people in circus land don't necessarily they've got their set of things that they need to do, and so even performing with live musicians or live other elements is a little bit outside the comfort zone. And doing it with live electronics, with computer and other sound going, it's crazy.
Well, and Nate, if I remember correctly, you've done some stuff with aerial acrobatics, haven't you?
Right. And I've been thinking about crossover things. And particularly with different kinds of interfaces and working with Arduinos and sensors and things with your hands, I've been really interested in that stuff. So I'm gonna check this out. But in this piece, Brain Candy, you mentioned about how starting with something really simple, really clear. I agree that it was really effective for me too. Just and a great way to start with something so clear and then get into more complicated gestures, more complicated relationships. Yeah, and it's always a balance of like doing something where is this going to be a magic act or is it going to be a thing that you listen to, or like, and especially if it's you as the composer up there using your body on stage.
Yeah.
Like, do you keep a straight face? Do you like
right. I actually have a circus background myself. My hometown, Middletown, Connecticut, has a theater company called Oddfellows Playhouse. They do a youth circus in the summer, and I did that for several years. I learned how to unicycle and juggle clubs, and I did some theater in high school. So I've been on stage before, and I think I have somewhat a sort of a stage presence. You know, I'm not a professional performer or anything, but that's sometimes when I've finished performing that piece, people usually say something along the lines of, you really sold it. You know, it wasn't like a gawky composer who's never seen the light of day up there on stage, you know, which can kind of make or break the piece sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's like a mixed compliment of like, you didn't mess that up at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, it is what it is. You know, I try to sell it. It is my music. I try to make it a convincing performance. I try to, you know, strike a balance between, you know, not be up there like a statue, but also not be too ham-fisted with it, not be too cheesy. So it's tough.
Right, which is definitely a hard balance to strike.
Right.
Especially as the performer of the piece that you yourself have written.
Right. Yeah, you got to be careful not to get lost in your own, you know, you don't want to spend too much time focusing on one gesture that you spent, you know, hours and days completing and really savoring it, because it's just a performance, and you know, it's what feels like, you know, 30 seconds to you could be like 6 or 7 minutes when you're not paying attention. So
and the audience doesn't have that context of spending 20 hours with that gesture.
Right. Less is more. Right. Leave them wanting more instead of wanting less.
Well, and that was another thing that was really interesting about Brain Candy to me, was your use of silence in the piece. That it's not this constant wall of sound, Phil Spector type feel to the piece that you see in a lot of electroacoustic music.
Yeah, all things in moderation. You know, I think an effective piece is one that has contrast in all dimensions. It's got, you know, whether there's sound or whether there's not sound, you know, and I think if you do one or the other, you know, like not enough sound or way too much sound, it can get really tiresome. And, you know, same thing with all sorts of dichotomies, like pitch versus non-pitch, regular rhythm versus irregular rhythm, loud versus quiet. You know, I think it's, you want to sort of think about all these different dimensions as your piece progresses and think, is there variety? Is there sufficient contrast? And I think if you hit all those marks, most likely it's going to be a good piece.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like you've had some great success achieving those things in this piece. And just one little technical question, I guess. So for our listeners that haven't been able to see the video of this, you've got 2 gloves that each have some sensors, and it seems like some gyroscope action of like what the position, relative angle of your hands, and also whether they're open or closed.
Right. So the gloves they're identical. You know, they're just left-right gloves with the same thing. They have a photocell, which is a light-sensitive resistor, on the palm, and on the back of the hand there's an XY accelerometer. So that you know, if I move my hand slowly, you know, it goes from like a value of 300 to, you know, 650 or something. And so that doesn't matter how fast I'm moving. It knows the sort of orientation. But if I move my hand quickly, then it'll sort of spike those values. And so it'll get up into like the 800s or like down into the 100s. And so I can use those as triggers, right? So there's actually a lot of things going on. I can use the light sensors as triggers, right? That's how I do the ping pong balls at the beginning. I calibrate them in the tech rehearsal, the tech run, to figure out what's the maximum ambient light I can get and how dark can I make them. That's sort of my boundaries. And then I set a threshold, and if one hand, you know, gets enough light, it triggers a ping pong ball, and then it doesn't reset the trigger until it gets, you know, enough darkness. But of course, it's also continuous, right? I can sort of, you know, sweep a cutoff frequency on a filter by opening and closing the hand slowly. And then the accelerometers on the back, those have continuous control as well. But I also, towards the end of the piece, I'll sort of make a quick jerking motion with one of the hands that triggers like a burst of bells.
Yeah.
So there's actually a lot of possibilities. I was really pleased with the combination that I settled on for these.
Yeah.
So jazz hands sound like bells.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I got to be careful not to get too carried away and do jazz hands in the performance. I think that kind of ruins it.
Yeah, gotta mind those eyebrows as you go, right?
Right.
Well, so I guess one question I had is, watching the video of you doing this, you're using your hands to do the gestures for the input for the software,
Right.
but you're also using your hands to sometimes touch the keyboard.
Right. I have my iPad as part of the piece. It's running Lemur, which is it's an OSC interface designer for mobile platforms, and it's a lot like TouchOSC. It's more developed, it's more expensive than TouchOSC, but that's just what I ended up using. And that's sort of my global control. Mostly the iPad is used to step through the piece, state 1, state 2, state 3, turn this process on, turn this process off. And as I was writing the piece, it got to the point where it was more complex than I could deal with a simple like spacebar, next, because I wanted to be able to, turn on the ping pong balls or change the delay rate when they would sort of drop and
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to change chords, and I wanted to be able to sort of improvise a little bit. So if I had made it simple enough to step through with spacebar, then what I would have done is just add a button to one of my hands, so that I could just next. But sometimes it was multidimensional. It wasn't just next. So I ended up making a Lemur interface, and this is the one thing I don't really like about the piece. I think it really breaks the flow. And when I've got the audience captivated and I'm shaping the sound in front of them, I've got this orb of sound energy, and then I just pause and push a button. And it's not ideal. I think that's the main weakness of this piece, is that it's hard to get into because I'm constantly pausing and pressing buttons. I couldn't. That was the best I could come up with. I think I would have had to change something substantially, and it was already going in a direction I had sort of already committed to it. So,
and I don't think that wasn't as much of a detriment to the flow of the piece for me. My question was just like, how do you stop it from listening to your hands as you're using your hands for not your hands?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the riskiest alternatives I could have done was some sort of gesture recognition. If the program gets a particular sequence of sensor data, but that's just too scary. It's just too tough to calibrate, and it's just so the iPad was just sort of like now stop this process, now change this process from A to B and B to C, and that's just my global control.
Yeah, and it sounds like a good balance of easier path than
Right. Yeah, my primary advisor at UT, Russell Pinkston, would often invoke the KISS acronym, KISS.
Oh yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Nice.
So I did try to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, well, also really achieving some good complex technical things. So,
yeah,
that's great.
Now, speaking of keeping it simple, you do have another piece where your sensors appear to be much further reduced in Invisible Ink, where you only have the Wacom tablet.
Right. So that is, I had seen a few pieces for Wacom or Wacom. I've actually heard it both ways. I'm not sure.
I have no idea.
Yeah. I'm gonna call it Wacom.
Yeah.
Wacom just sounds like it's mole related.
Yeah.
Wacom tablet.
Whack-a-mole tablet. Okay. I saw a Wacom piece by actually Ron. I think it was Ron Quivola at the Super Collider symposium in Boulder, Colorado. This was, I want to say, 2013, and I remember it stuck with me. It was a really cool piece. And it was clear that he was getting all sorts of data like tilt and pressure and angle, and I got to Illinois and I realized we have a few not the latest greatest model, but still functional Wacom tablets. And I was able to install. There you go. There's one.
I have one sitting under my desk so that someday maybe I'll make a piece with it.
And here I've got mine as well.
Yeah, right.
I'm apparently the odd man out here.
So I installed the driver and played around with it, and I was not able to figure out how to get things like tilt and pressure and rotation. It may be because it's an older model and I have a newer computer, and I think it probably could be done with some like Cocoa programming or something really, really low level that would have taken a lot of work and a lot of headaches. So what I ended up doing is, I mean, the computer sees it as indistinguishable from a mouse or a trackpad.
Right.
You're just scribbling around with the pen, and it can't tell the difference. So, but of course you can do things with more precision because you've got a pen in your hand, and that's very familiar. So the first thing I did with this piece is I didn't do anything with sound. I just got the data in, and I would sample the X and Y positions, over and fill those XY coordinates into like a buffer over 16 or 32 samples. And then every time a new XY coordinate got filled, it would push the old one out, and then I would do some math with that buffer of data in order to calculate things like angle and speed and stuff like that. And so I didn't ultimately just have XY data. I had X and Y and speed and angle, and Booleans like whether the pen is down or up, so I can trigger things, and also a Boolean whether the program considers the pen to be moving or not. So if you move slow enough, it says it's not moving, even if the coordinates are changing. So that was a fairly complicated thing. Took some time, but then once I had a reliable stream of data coming in, then composition begins, and I make some sounds and recorded some samples that I was going to use in the piece, and then just sort of map all that data. So this one's much simpler compared to things like Brain Candy or Genetic Anomalies, where it's just I'm ultimately just sort of using the mouse to make sound. But I tried to get creative with it. I didn't just want it to be like scribble a sound with the pen, take the pen off, and it stops. So there's a section in the middle of the piece where I sort of divide the tablet into a 6x6 grid, and each grid plays a sample in a rhythmic pattern, and that sample is uniquely spatialized in an 8-channel ring, and so I can draw little boxes and sort of carve a path and create this sort of somewhat predictable pattern of samples. And and there's another, the sort of climax of the piece is when I have this I actually sampled one of the tape, the reel-to-reel tape decks that we have here in the studios. Nice. And I loaded up a reel tape and just hit rewind and just recorded all the sounds of hitting the transport buttons and all the mechanical clunking that it does.
Oh, great.
And so in the middle of the piece, at the height of the piece, I lift the pen, and there's this like stop, rewind, and then you hear the tape rewind, and then I can go to the next event, and then I press the pen down, and it's like scrubbing. It's like pushing your thumb against the edge of the reel, and and then once the pen is moving fast enough, I threshold that data so that that's the trigger to move on to the next section. And I try to set that threshold so that I really have to work for it, but that I can, because it adds drama. It's if you don't want it to just like do next. Really sort of scribble as fast as you can. And so I just uploaded a video of that I performed in New York City to my YouTube channel a couple days ago.
Yeah, and we got to watch that, and we'll have a link to that video in our show notes as well.
Cool.
And it's an interesting thing doing something like that where you're in this video, and in the performance, the viewers got to see live a video feed of what you were doing with the tablet as they were hearing the sound that was coming out.
Yeah, that was an early goal in writing this piece, is that I imagine there were a lot of concert halls where this might be performed where you can't really see what I'm doing, because the stage is higher than the audience, and I'm like, probably, upstage somewhere. So I did buy a webcam and mounted it on a boom arm, and that's so the premiere, which was at the 2017 Seamus conference. I was in a hall that didn't have video capabilities, so I performed that one without the video feed, which I thought was actually okay. I thought it was still you know, there's lights on me and you can see the pen moving. And, you know, again, I try not to be a statue. I try to actually get into it a little bit, but not too much. And I was told that it sounded good, so that's good. But the second performance at the New York City Electroacoustic Music Festival, that one had video, and I thought that was, I think I'd prefer it that way.
Yeah.
Now, I was curious about the video in particular. On the version that's on YouTube, it appears that you are chasing a laser pointer. Is that an effect of the video, or are you actually chasing a laser pointer as you're performing it, which would be a really cool piece in
there's
itself?
No laser pointer. I mean, the mouse cursor is visible on screen.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, it's weird because, you know, you can see the whole Wacom tablet on the video projection.
Yeah. But
the actual workspace is smaller than the tablet. It's this sort of sub rectangle. And so, you know, it's the mouse cursor does not always align with where the pen point appears on the projection screen. So as I move the mouse all the way to the left, you know, it's, you know, so there's no way to turn off the cursor as far as I could tell. Maybe you can go into the command line and say hide my cursor, but I don't want to do that because then I don't know how to get it back. I need that to click on stuff.
It's a useful tool, I suppose.
Right. So I didn't actually realize that until I mean, I guess I'd sort of thought about it, but I was like, whatever. I mean, I didn't find it too distracting, but maybe it's more distracting than I thought, just having that cursor wiggling around and I'm sort of chasing it.
Well, I was just kind of wondering if that was the score itself.
No,
that would be really interesting to have a randomly generated pointer that you're chasing throughout space and trying desperately to catch up to.
No score. A lot of pieces I've been doing recently, there's no score. It's sort of a set of events that are somewhat flexible and partially improvised, and I have like a general structure that I follow. But within each event, I can play around, you know, like, no score, just sort of me planning to, which I guess is a little bit limiting. So if somebody wanted, I think somebody asked me about performing this piece, and, you know, it's kind of tricky. You really have to know it, you know. I mean, I could teach somebody, but it would be not a trivial thing to make a score. And
I mean, definitely. Maybe this is a path. It sounds a little stressful, the idea of some other person just watching and studying a video of your mouse cursor going on the screen and trying to imitate it.
Yeah.
Well, from seconds 0 to 5, he's up here, and then he kind of scribbles a lot in the top right-hand side.
Very dedicated Wacom.
Right. Very few Wacom virtuosos in this world so far, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking the score would end up looking like Stockhausen's Study 2, only much more difficult.
Yeah. So it's funny, this idea of somebody else playing your electronic piece and using your hardware. It's a thing we've talked about a bunch of different times, where people so often write pieces for themselves or write it with a set of instructions and with the go button for somebody else to do.
Right.
And you've got an older piece, Singularity, that you did for Wind Ensemble and Live Electronics.
Right. That was my dissertation piece at UT Austin.
Yeah.
And I actually wanted to do a piece for Wind Ensemble and electronics for my master's thesis back in 2010, and I was very smartly talked out of it by my advisors because I think I was not ready. I mean, I was just barely able to hold on to Super Collider. And I mean, Wind Ensemble is how I got into composition. I was in band in high school, and then I played with the Wesleyan Wind Ensemble while I was still a high school student because they needed percussionists, and so all of a sudden I got introduced to Granger and to Kelly, and then I continued in college and did a minor in wind conducting at North Texas. So, and then I got into electronic music a little bit at North Texas, but it wasn't until UT Austin that I really started to bite down on all of that. But I had wanted to sort of get back to wind ensemble. I do enjoy writing for instruments. It's just not something I've been doing all that recently. So Singularity was kind of a culmination of many years of being in this world and then being in that world and finally finding a way to bring them together. And it was a lot of fun to write that.
I mean, Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a whole different set of challenges writing electronics for somebody else to perform.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we were commenting, Ben and I were talking about the computer player and the talks up there on stage.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
something you see every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a score for the laptop player. The laptop player reads a part that the conductor has on the score, and it it's notated with partially traditional notation as much as makes sense, but it's primarily measures and time signatures with letters with down arrows saying push this letter on the computer keyboard
Yeah.
on this beat, and you may have to hold it down for some amount of time. So I just tried to make it as simple as possible. Just no complex stuff. I mean, I toyed with the idea of using a MIDI keyboard controller so that I could actually notate notes, on a musical staff. So press middle C here, press C sharp here. But I just didn't do that because I figured it might be a little tricky for some ensembles to get a hold of a MIDI controller, and they're all sort of different. And then,
Right.
Yeah.
just making sure it's just that everyone's got a laptop and Super Collider's free. Just download it, and the code for the interface just has in a giant comment at the top. Just hold Command, press Enter. And so you don't scroll down. Don't look over here at what I'm doing. You just.
But what if I'm running a PC?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. There's like a README, I think. But
It says
anyway.
the same thing.
Yeah.
Just hold
Yeah,
up.
pretty much.
Why are you looking at this README? Just. Yeah. So yeah, that I think that piece turned out pretty okay. I've University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill premiered it. Evan Feldman conducted it, and
Yeah.
there's a video on YouTube, and they did an absolutely great job. It's a fantastic performance, and
Yeah.
just over the past year, it was performed at the University of Prince Edward Island. Just their
Okay.
director contacted me, and then they sent me a CD after it was done, so I got that now.
Nice.
So it's getting a little bit of attention, and hopefully I'll get some more performances. And I'd like to write another wind ensemble piece with electronics, because I think this one turned out pretty good, and I learned some important things about it. So
Is there something you would do differently in your approach now, 3 years later after Singularity?
I don't know. I might be a little bit more careful with structuring the events and things, just to make starting in the middle of a movement during rehearsal a little bit easier.
Yeah.
It was possible with this one, but it was in. I put the instructions in like a separate document that said computer cue sheet, and it just basically gave you a little Excel table, and it said if starting between these measures, push this. So I used the number row on the top of the keyboard for cues, like starting mid rehearsal, and the letters are for performance events. But when the University of Texas at Austin played this as well, and they invited me back. And I realized that the laptop player had not even been aware of this file. And so they had been starting at the beginning and sort of awkwardly skipping through all the musical events and stuff. So I think there was a moment where they were trying to start at some moment, and I said, just try pressing 4. And they were like, wish we had known that 2 months ago. So I think I'll try to make that either more obvious, or just work the events in such a way that it's just, you don't have to worry about that as much. So that's always a tricky thing when working with electronics, is making it easy for the performer or performers to rehearse it in an efficient way.
Right.
Yeah, that's something I found very quickly when I started doing interactive pieces, that I had to create cues in the computer part as well as rehearsal numbers in the score.
Right.
Yeah.
Something you got to think about. So I might try to improve that next time.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, it was good to hear some of your notes on the staff, as it were, too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like I'm feeling a little weird, actually, just that I've been so far away from, the old treble and bass clef recently. It's like, and there's all sorts of friends and colleagues are composing chamber music, really interesting stuff with really complex sounds, and I've just been sort of out of that practice for a couple of years, really, and I'm just starting to get a little worried that I'm losing my edge, and my students are gonna, wanting to
Yeah.
study with me, and they're doing a chamber piece, and I just, so
Yeah.
I do want to get back into it and really challenge myself and just make sure I can, work composition from all these angles. And so yeah, it's just something that's on my mind. But
I mean, there's always so many different directions to working on this thing, working on that thing.
Yeah, got to get back to the legit music.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Manuscript paper. Get your pen and ink out with the rollers and stuff.
To be fair, I've been writing mostly legit music over the summer, and it's still pretty out there.
Yeah.
So a lot of the electroacoustic techniques seem to have filtered in there. Like, let's not have time signatures.
Yeah.
Or key signatures. Or definitive notation for anything. And we'll write this for organ.
Yeah, right.
I'm not kidding either.
Just a whole other different set of technical challenges, I'm sure.
Yeah. You can't really deny the influence once you've been, that deep into the electroacoustic world. It just starts to exert its influence one way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for better or worse. Yeah. Well, fun. So I guess it's midsummer, semester's about to come up. Do you have any other events coming up or other things you'd like to plug?
Yeah, well, I have two projects that I'm working on currently.
Sweet.
The first one, one of my coworkers here at this University of Illinois School of Music, he's got a doctorate in saxophone performance, and we hang out a bunch. His name's Nathan Mandel. And he asked me to write him a piece. He's doing a recital in, I think it's November, and it's going to be, this piece is supposedly, unless something drastically changes, for electronic wind instrument, or EWI. I don't think it's an actual EWI. It's like a different model, but it's a MIDI controller that you play like a wind instrument. And so it's going to be a Super Collider, partially improvised live piece. I think I'm actually going to be up on stage with him with a controller, controlling the sound that he's making. So and then adapting that piece or making a variant of it that he's going to send to the International Saxophone Congress.
World Sax Congress.
The World Saxophone Congress, right, which is in Croatia in a year from now, I think. So that's one project that that's some of what I'm doing on the live streams currently.
Cool.
And the other project, which I'm really excited about, is it's basically an installation that I got a grant for, and it's going to be a controller of sorts, a light sensitive controller. It's like, my Arduino fascination from Brain Candy, but sort of exploded into this large scale project. So it's in progress. I've got some. It's a 16 by 16 grid of 256 light sensors with like 48 breadboards snapped together and 16 multiplexers, 16 channel multiplexers.
Yeah.
So gonna have 256 discrete inputs coming into an Arduino Mega, which is going to be piped into Super Collider. Yeah. And then once I've confirmed that it's all working and the data is flowing reliably, then mapping that to various sound events and hopefully getting it installed somewhere where people can come in and just play with it and wave your hands over it and make weird sounds. And
so this is almost like an interactive version of Xenakis's UPIC.
Yeah, I something like that, I guess. I'm not. My sort of background for coming to this idea was I basically using the Arduino. I confess I was not really focusing too much on existing repertoire that might be up this alley. Yeah. But I had seen a few people do things with multiplexers, and I think there's one or two projects with the multiple sensors, but I couldn't find anything on the order of 256 sensors. So go big or go home is
right. Definitely.
And it's research. I don't know if it's going to work. It might sort of, we'll find out. So
yeah, either way, you'll get really good at multiplexing.
Yeah. So that's over in one of the studios. I have a student who helped me with a lot of the wiring, and I have another student with woodworking experience who's helping me build a box and drilling holes. So it's eventually going to be sort of, sealed away in this tomb. And just the photocells have their heads poking out, and Yeah,
That's
so
a whole, yeah, that half of the Arduino work of building the cases and building everything. Yeah.
I know it's weird. I have to remind myself that I do have a composition degree, several of them.
Right.
And but here I am, you know, building a box and plugging sensors into breadboards.
Yeah, man. In some ways, I think that's what took me away from writing so much music, was that I enjoyed building the boxes so much.
Yeah, it's fun to build stuff. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. And with the saxophone piece, I have one request. At some point, like if you involve any gloves or anything, if you could do air sax next to him doing air sax.
Oh, that would be something.
That would be pretty amazing.
Harmony.
Yeah, like throwing your voice or something, or it's like I'm actually playing it over here. That would, yeah, possibilities are endless.
Yeah, that they are.
That would be cool.
Oh, well, thanks so much for this time. It's been such a pleasure to chat.
It's been great. It's been great talking to the both of you. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, sweet. Well, I think we've gotten to the last segment of the show where one of us tries to take 2 minutes or less. It's a special challenge called the 2-minute challenge, aptly named.
Okay.
So it's Ben's turn this month, and he's going to take 2 minutes to go through some concept for us. Ben, what are you doing this month?
Well, I am going to appropriately talk a little bit about computer and human interaction.
Sweet.
I thought that would be a good topic given our guest.
Yeah. And I was hoping through watching the YouTube tutorials on SuperCollider that you had made, make a timer for this that would beep at the end. I didn't get that far. So
yeah. Well, I'm still slacking on that. I'm using the iPhone for the timer because, hey, it's
that kiss method, I guess, right?
Yeah, keeping it simple.
Pretty much. And it's digital, so.
Sure. All right. Well, whenever you're ready, Ben.
Okay. So one of the central problems with writing interactive electronic music is just what the name implies, interaction. How do you take input from a live performer or their friend at the laptop and translate that into instructions for a computer to make sense of in a meaningful way that expresses your musical vision? Fortunately, if you're using conventional technologies like MIDI or standard human interface devices like a mouse or a keyboard, most programs and programming languages have you covered. MIDI is easily configured and remapped so that your sustain pedal can be used as a loop trigger or to send a specific MIDI value to trigger a sequence of events. Keystrokes can easily be made to do the same thing in programs like Ableton or Reaper, and Max, PD, or SuperCollider have a variety of built-in or freely available objects to handle a variety of human interface devices, including MPE-capable controllers, touchscreens, gyroscopes, and analog sticks in video game controllers. And with the rise of cheap and easily programmed microcontrollers like the Arduino or apps like TouchOSC, serial or OSC data can be taken from whatever sensor you want to interact with physically or through your phone. We've never had so many possible options at one time, but there's a problem. With all of this data comes issues of how to map the computer-performer interactions. Should the performer just use a foot pedal to advance cues? Or what about having someone use a set of photoresistors to control feedback loops? How about controlling ring modulation through luminosity from a camera? It's all possible, but in order to make your piece successful, the composer needs to be more than just a programmer. They also need to think about how to map out their interactions. We're beyond really just simply press spacebar here to get cues, and now need to create more meaningful interactions between the performer and the computer. And that comes down to careful planning and mapping out these interactions through the entire piece. They can stay the same, they can change, you might have one trigger or 100, but you need to plan them out. And as you've heard from our guest today, the results can be spectacular.
Wow, nailed it.
That's what they call it.
Just under it. All right, would you turn off?
Yeah.
There we go.
Nice.
All right, so we'll probably get a lot of angry responses to that in the comments because you didn't talk specifically about this one thing that is my pet issue.
Luminosity in the camera isn't technically luminosity. It's a
yeah. And what about using histograms and outputting color values? And it's all possible. Take your pick. But the idea is it has to be mapped in a way that makes it a meaningful usage of the technology.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, sweet. Thanks for that, Ben. Excellent work as always. And thanks for so Eli Fieldsteel, thanks so much for coming and sharing some of your work with us. It's been such a pleasure to dig in and listen to some of the things.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, and particularly great. So you've obviously been speaking on the internet for a while. Yeah. And so thank you for just speaking with us
anytime
so well about all these things too. I can't wait to keep digging into the Super Collider tutorials, particularly episodes 15 through 17, where get to learn to compose a piece. I can't wait to see what those are going to be all about.
Yeah. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, thanks. And it's great to see some music people with circus background too. That's always fun. I was thinking about when we were talking about multiplexing, the juggling multiplexing kind of stuff. Yeah, right? Yeah, it's fun. All right, well, here we are. We're thanks for tuning into this latest episode of Patch In. This is number 40 for us, I believe.
It is.
Right, yeah. So, woo, fire the fireworks and everything. We'll add in something in post, maybe. And but yeah, so this has been another month of Patch In. Thanks for joining us. You can support our show and the rest of our shows on the SoundNotion.tv network by going to SoundNotion.tv. If you go to soundnotion.tv/PI, that's where you'll find the show notes for this episode and all of our past episodes, as well as archive of all of our Patch In episodes that we have. Obviously, you can listen or tune in however you listen to podcasts, whatever podcatcher app you have on your phone. And if you go to the website, there's a couple ways you can support. We've got an Amazon search box where if you go through that to get whatever you were going to get anyway, then we get a little bit of a kickback. And there's also places to donate. But in any case, thanks for joining us. My name's Nate Blyton.
I'm Ben Furman.
We'll see you next month.